Hey guys, Devin here with Admiral Off-Road, and today we're going to be swapping our front axle from a low pinion Dana 30 with 355 gears to a high pinion Dana 30 with 488s to match the gears in the back. Let's get started. First thing we're going to do with the wheels and tires off, the axles supported, the vehicle supported, is we're going to move our brake caliper from our rotor. So there's two 1/2-inch bolts holding it on. There's one here and then one a little bit down low. You might not be able to see, but just two 1/2-inch bolts. Now we can just pull off the caliper. Like that. And we don't want to hang it by our brake line here, so I'm just going to rest it for now at least on the lower control arm. The next thing we're going to do is remove the shock from the axle here. Just two 1/2-inch bolts. Hold it in place. Now that we've got the shock bolts taken out, we can leave the shock in place. We don't necessarily need to remove it, and I'm just going to leave it in place. We'll move on to removing our steering linkage. So there's going to be a connection on this knuckle and on the knuckle on the other side. All we're going to do is remove this pin first. So bend the sides straight. You should be able to push it through. With the pin removed, now we can remove the castle nut. Now we've got the castle nut removed, the way we're going to take off this actual steering linkage is we're going to flip the castle nut over, spin it back on here, and then just hit it with a hammer to pop it through. The reason I'm screwing this back on is so I don't mess up any of the threads. We're just giving a nice flat surface to hit with a hammer. Okay, now we can do the same thing on the other side. Last thing holding on our steering to our axle right now is our steering damper, so I'll take that off with an impact. Alright, and our steering is free from our axle now. Only a couple things left, just the track bar, the control arms, and our breather tube. Now we've got all the steering out of the way, we'll get onto our track bar. If you have the stock track bar hardware, you'll have what's called a flag nut on the back, so all you have to worry about is taking off the bolt here. I unfortunately do not, so I'm going to have to put a wrench back up in here, and we'll just take it off. Alright, there's the track bar. We're just hanging on now with the control arms, and we have a breather hose to take off. Now we're going to remove our upper and lower control arm bolts. Just leave everything loosely in place for now until we got all the bolts taken off. That way we don't have to worry about the axle shifting while we're trying to take any of the bolts out. Alright, now we're working on the upper control arm bolt. The good thing about this is it has a little flag nut on the back here, so we don't have to worry about putting a wrench on it. We can just take off the nut. That's backwards. Alright, again, we'll leave that on there loosely for now, and we'll hit the other side. But you don't need to see that, it's just the same as this side. Next thing we're going to remove is our breather tube. This is just attached to the axle housing right up here, and we'll just pull it straight off. There we go. Apologize, you can see the drive shaft is already out, and I didn't get a chance to film that. But that means we should be ready to go right now. We have everything disconnected, so let's go over one more time everything we had to disconnect. We had the brakes, the control arms, the steering, the track bar, and our breather tube. I think that's it, so we should be ready to take this axle out now. Alright, we got the old axle out. This is the new axle. It's just sitting under the vehicle right now. We're going to start installing stuff. We're going to have to line everything up. I think we're going to start with control arms first, just kind of get it vaguely where we need it under the vehicle, and then start trying to connect our track bar and our steering and all of that. So I'm going to do upper control arm, lower control arm on both sides, and then we'll go from there. There's an upper arm, and we're going to leave it all loose for now, just so we can kind of slide it all around and really get it right where we need it. Now that we have the upper control arms in place, let's go ahead and see if we can line up these lower control arms. So, looks like we're going to have to rotate the axle and pull it back a little bit. And again, we're just barely putting any of these bolts and everything in place. That way we can still move everything around. I'll come back and tighten everything once we've got everything lined up. So, top and bottom on this side. I'll go do the same thing on the other side. But I probably won't film that since it's just the same thing. Just a bunch of wiggling the axle and lining it all up. With the control arms all in place, now we can go ahead and reinstall our spring and our shock. And I think we're high enough that I can just slide this in. Let's see, oh, might have to drop this a little bit more. There we go. Let's see. Alright. No spring compressor required. And we'll go ahead and line up our shock. And reinstall our bolts. Cool, almost done. All we have left now is track bar, steering, and drive shaft, brakes, and breather hose. The next thing we're going to try and reinstall is our track bar. Now, it doesn't line up right now because the axle's all the way drooped out. You notice there's quite a bit of difference here. So we're going to jack the axle up until these two holes line up. and then reinstall it. We're doing this first because I know if my track bar is attached and all of my control arms are good, then my steering should all line up because the axle will be centered under the vehicle. So again, we're going to jack up the axle till this lines up and then reinstall our bolt. Now this should be centered with the weight of the vehicle on the axle, so we actually might have to jack this up quite a bit. And that looks about right. Cool. So, go ahead and install this. Put the sleeve back in here. Install our pin. Come on, just a tiny bit more. And I don't know if you can see how bad this is. These aren't my welds. Please don't get mad at me in the comments. Somebody clearly broke something and then tried to repair it here. So, I mean, it looks thick enough that it'll all hold, but those aren't mine. With the axle lined up underneath the Jeep, now we can start reinstalling our steering. I'm going to do my steering stabilizer first because when I install the steering, this joint here gets in the way of me being able to put the bolt in. So I'm actually going to do the steering stabilizer first, followed by the rest of the actual steering linkages. Alright, we're on the passenger side knuckle here. We're just going to reinstall some more of our steering. There we go. Just line it up, get the castle nut installed. We're only going to tighten this down hand tight for now. When we go to tighten it down for real though, actually really tighten it down, we want to make sure, since this is a castle nut, we line it up so the grooves in the castle nut line up with the hole in the bolt, and then we put our pin through it. A lot of steering components, stuff like that, will have these castle nuts on it, just because they're always turning and moving, and that just helps make sure that this nut isn't going to back off. But for now, we're just lining everything up, so hand tight is fine. So we've run into a little snag here with the getting the brakes back on. I got new rotors, and when you do that, they're usually a lot thicker than your old ones, especially if your old ones are worn down. Which means you'll probably have to adjust your calipers a little bit. You're going to need to compress this piston here, move it out of the way, that way this will fit back over this, because right now it won't fit. This is too skinny to fit over this rotor. Usually that's not a big deal. You just take some clamps and you can squish this a little bit and get it to fit, but I just cannot do that for whatever reason. So that means I'm going to have to take off this brake and put it in my vise to work on it. That's not a big deal. It's easy to take off. The only real bummer about this is now I'm going to have to bleed my brakes, which is going to add some time. So hopefully you're able to just put some clamps on this and squeeze it down, and then you won't have to do this. But if you are in the same position as me, just take this off and make sure you got a catch pan underneath it, because there's going to be some brake fluid. Also, make sure you don't get this on your car, because brake fluid will eat right through your paint. Alright, here we are at the vise now. We've got the caliper in the vise, and we're going to just, again, compress the piston inside here to move these two brake pads farther apart. That way we can set it over top of our new rotor. There we go. And we'll just push it all the way out. And as you can see now, our piston is completely compressed. These are very far apart now, so this should have no problem fitting over top of our rotor. Alright, now that we've got our caliper separated, we should be able to fit it over the rotor no problem. And reinstall it. So I just got to move these rubber pieces out of the way. Plunger. Two, and you also have to line up the little brackets here with the brackets on the axle. So. And we'll reattach our line. All right, brakes are on. Like I said, we are going to have to bleed these at the end. But for now, we have two more things to do. We have to put in the drive shaft and our breather tube, and that'll be it. The next thing we're going to do is attach our breather tube, and for whatever reason, this is now on the passenger side on the high pinion axle. It's kind of interesting, but it just slips over a little nipple there, so you can do that by hand. Last thing to do is install our drive shaft, and then, well, now we got to bleed the brakes, but that'll be it. The next thing we're going to do is install our drive shaft. So it's just really easy. It's 4 bolts in the front, 4 in the back. The front have these little U-straps that'll just go over the U-joint right there and right there. So let's see if we can get it in place first. There we go. And we'll put our straps in. Okay, now we can move on to the transfer case section. It's pretty much the same idea, just 4 bolts to hold it in. Alright, we're back at the transfer case now. Here we got our crossmember. This is the front output shaft of the transfer case, and here's our drive shaft coming all the way back here. So I don't know if you can see real well. It's hard to get a good angle on it. But there's just, again, 4 bolts that are going to hold this in place. So we just line it up with the output yoke on the transfer case. Kind of hard to do with one hand. And then insert your 4 bolts. Okay. I apologize, I know I'm super in the way and making shadows and stuff. I'll try and get out of the way here in just a second so you can actually see what I'm talking about. There we go. Now you can see a little bit better. Sorry about that. And because we have the transfer case in 2-wheel drive and we don't have the tires on the ground right now, I can just spin this pretty easily to get to the other side. Alright. Now as far as the axle install goes, that's it. That's the last thing. Now, obviously, I'm going to go back and off camera, put Loctite on everything and really tighten everything down. I've just really hand tightened it just to show you guys how it all goes together. So off camera, you don't need to watch me put Loctite on bolts and put them in. The last thing that we're going to have to do today is bleed the brakes. So hold on, and that's going to be next. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. And if you like what you saw here, please like and subscribe. As you can see, we're back down on all 4 wheels. We've got the axle swapped in. What you didn't see is I went back through and tightened down all the bolts and Loctited it all. I just didn't want to waste your time watching that. I'm also going to make the brake bleeding its own video. Since it's not really part of the axle swap process, I'm just going to make it its own thing. But once I post it, I will put the link right here. If you find that your steering wheel is off-center now, that you've swapped your axle and you've messed with your steering a little bit, I have a fix for that too. Go ahead and click right over here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.